It's roughly 20,000 years ago, the coldest point of the last ice age. You look in every direction and there isn't a single tree. Not one. Just endless frozen ground under a sky that's been the same flat gray for what feels like weeks. The wind doesn't gust here. It just constantly pushes, cutting straight through anything you're wearing, and there's no ridge, no forest, nothing to hide behind for hundreds of miles in any direction. This isn't a bad day. This is Tuesday. This is what an enormous stretch of the planet looked like for roughly 100,000 years. And somehow, impossibly, humans didn't just survive it. They spread across almost all of it. Let's get the scale of this right, because it's genuinely hard to picture. At the peak of the Ice Age, ice sheets covered close to a third of Earth's land surface, in places over a mile thick. So much water was locked up in that ice that global sea levels dropped by more than 120 meters, exposing land bridges, river valleys, and entire coastlines that simply don't exist on any modern map. Huge parts of Europe, Asia, and North America turned into what scientists call the Mammoth Steppe, a cold, dry, treeless grassland stretching for thousands of miles, home to more grazing megafauna than almost anywhere on Earth today. Technically habitable, but only just. Here's the first problem that should have ended things immediately. Fire needs fuel, and fuel, traditionally, means wood. On a treeless steppe, there is simply no wood to gather anywhere. So how do you keep a fire burning through an entire Arctic winter with nothing around you burn? The answer, found through the same relentless trial and error as everything else: bones. Animal bones, especially ones still rich in marrow and fat, burn surprisingly well. Hot, slow, and smoky, almost like a greasy candle. Archaeological sites across the steppe are full of hearths built almost entirely from burned bone. Some of these hearths were even lined with rings of stone, deliberately built to hold heat and block the constant wind from snuffing the flame out. This wasn't just a campfire. It was engineered heating. At Dolní Věstonice in what's now the Czech Republic, people went even further, figuring out how to fire small clay figurines in a kiln roughly 27,000 years ago, among the oldest fired ceramics ever found anywhere. They were making pots. They were experimenting with fire and clay purely to see what it could do. Shelter followed the exact same logic. At sites like Mazyrik in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of actual dwellings built from mammoth bones, not decorated with them, built from them as the primary material. Jawbones stacked like bricks, tusks curved into archways, skulls used as structural anchors. The entire frame then covered in hides for insulation. This was architecture engineered from the only large, rigid material available in a landscape with zero trees. Some of these bone structures were sturdy enough that people returned to them season after season, which tells us this wasn't an emergency shelter thrown together once. It was a planned, reusable home built to outlast the people who built it and be handed down to whoever came back next winter. Clothing had to evolve too, and not just into something warm. It had to become something layered and precisely tailored. A single hide draped loosely over the shoulders does almost nothing at -30 degrees. What actually works is a full system: an inner layer, a separate outer layer, fitted sleeves, dedicated boots, and mittens sewn with the fur turned inward for insulation against bare skin. We found bone needles fine enough to thread sinew through multiple layers of hide at once, which tells us this wasn't guesswork anymore. It was a real clothing technology tested and refined across many generations. Tools got smarter too. People began setting tiny, precisely shaped stone blades into carved bone or wood handles, creating composite tools that could be repaired piece by piece instead of thrown away whole. Making one required planning multiple steps in advance, then following through days later. That's not instinct. That's forward-thinking design. Food came from megafauna, and megafauna is a polite way of saying animals that could very easily kill you. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant bison, and huge herds of migrating reindeer that people learned to track across entire seasons. But big game hunting wasn't the whole diet, and it couldn't be, because a failed hunt meant weeks without food. So people also fished with barbed bone hooks, trapped smaller animals like Arctic hare and ptarmigan, and gathered any edible plants the short summer thaw allowed. Specializing in only one food source is a great way to starve the first time it disappears. One invention made hunting the biggest animals survivable at all: the spear thrower, a simple carved lever that could launch a dart far harder and farther than a human arm alone. It turned what would otherwise be a suicidal charge into a strike from a real, safer distance. Even with that advantage, hunting megafauna was still extraordinarily dangerous. But the payoff was enormous. A single mammoth could realistically feed an entire group for weeks at a time, and nothing, genuinely nothing, went to waste. Meat was eaten immediately. Fat was rendered down and stored. Hides became shelter and clothing. Bones became tools, fuel, and building material. An Ice Age kill wasn't a meal. It was closer to a hardware store. At the burial site of Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found bodies adorned with literally thousands of carved ivory beads, each one taking real time and skill to make by hand. Even in the middle of the Ice Age, people still made time for art, ornament, and status. Deep inside cave systems in what's now France and Spain, people were also painting detailed, anatomically accurate images of the exact animals they hunted, sometimes in chambers that required crawling through total darkness to reach. This almost certainly wasn't decoration for its own sake. It looks like a way of recording and passing down knowledge about the animals a group's survival depended on. Fat mattered more than you'd probably think, to the point of being a genuine survival requirement, not just a preference. If you eat almost nothing but lean meat in extreme cold, your body could develop something researchers have literally nicknamed rabbit starvation. Your metabolism simply can't process that much pure protein without enough fat alongside it, and people can starve to death with a completely full stomach. This is very likely why marrow and fatty tissue were prized above all else in any kill, sometimes even more than the meat. Skeletal remains from this period also show something quietly remarkable: healed fractures in bones that would have made someone unable to hunt or travel for months. That healing only happens if the group kept feeding and protecting that person the entire time. Survival here wasn't purely individual. It ran on people carrying each other. Survival also depended on something far less visible than any tool: other people, specifically people you had never even met. Archaeologists have found ornamental shells and specific stone materials hundreds of kilometers away from their natural source. This points to deliberate, long-distance social networks. Alliances stretched across huge distances, existing specifically so that if your local area failed catastrophically, there was somewhere else and someone else to turn to for help. Genetic analysis of the Sungir remains found remarkably little inbreeding despite a tiny local population, which means groups were deliberately exchanging partners with distant, unrelated communities. Survival meant actively fighting isolation, not quietly accepting it. The Ice Age even opened a door that wouldn't otherwise have existed. With so much sea water locked into ice, the land bridge, now called Beringia, connected Siberia to Alaska, and groups followed, migrating herds across it, generation after generation. This single climate event is very likely the reason humans reached the Americas at all. Not everyone made it, and that part matters just as much. The archaeological record shows real evidence of local populations vanishing entirely, and groups pulling back into smaller, warmer pockets of land called refugia. In places like the Iberian and Italian peninsulas, waiting out the worst of the cold before spreading north again once the ice finally retreated. Through all of it, nothing about human biology actually changed to make any of this easier. We didn't grow thick fur. We didn't develop antifreeze blood. What changed was entirely behavioral: fire management, tailored clothing, bone architecture, fat-focused nutrition, and social networks stretched further than any other species had ever attempted. Every single person alive today descends from someone who made it through this. Not the biggest, not the strongest, just the ones who figured out how to burn bone instead of wood and trust a stranger hundreds of kilometers away enough to trade with them. So the next time your heating breaks for one single night and you complain about it, remember, Your ancestors did this for 10,000 years straight with nothing but bones, hides, and each other. Would you have made it? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.